Hi, I'm Melvin Way. This is 2014, February 16th. This is my second visit to the Salton Sea. The Salton Sea is a shallow, saline, endorheic rift lake located directly on the San Andreas Fault in California, and it covers, Riverside and Imperial County. So it looks very beautiful from certain angles like these, but at times it can be also very stinky, very hot, and due to algal blooms and the low elevation, and in the fact that this is located in the Colorado desert. A rift lake is a lake formed as a result of tectonic movements in the continental crust of the earth. They're often found within rift valleys and may be very deep, although the Salton Sea is considered to be more shallow, and sometimes there are very large steep cliffs along the fault margins. The Salton Sea is a result of a geographical feature known as the Salton Sink, which is an endorheic basin, which is an area that doesn't allow any kind of drainage to external bodies of water such as rivers or oceans. So this is basically formed by water converging due to gravity from all the surrounding lands in 360 degrees to this low point in the ground. The surface of the Salton Sea is 69 meters below sea level. That's very low, and it's kind of hard to find places like that where on land it's much lower than the sea level. This is one of the lowest places on land on Earth, I believe. But Death Valley, which is also in California, not all that far away, it's even deeper than the lowest point of the Salton Sea, and thus much, much hotter. Because generally when you go down in elevation, it gets a lot hotter. If you go up, it gets colder. A quick look at a list on Wikipedia of the lowest land locations relative to sea level on Earth reveals 12 locations that have lower elevation than here, but I think there's a little bit of redundancy in the list too. The shore of the Salton Sea is often scummy in places, and I think that's just because there's so many solutes dissolved in there. But if you look past that on a clear day, it's quite beautiful in its own right, and there are a lot of birds here. Thousands and thousands of birds call this place their home, or at least seasonal homes. And yeah, if you look here, it's a very nice shot of the Salton Sea with a reflection of the mountain ranges to the west. But when you look at the coast, there's a lot of garbage, salt deposits, and dead fish. Endorheic regions can occur in any climate, but they are commonly found in desert locations, in areas where there's high rainfall. Riparian erosion, basically stream-fed habitats, etc., will carve drainage channels out of these basins. In this dry Colorado desert, the water that comes into the Salton Sink, and hence the Salton Sea, is largely from seasonal streams because it's really hot and the elevation is low. Most of these riparian zones just dry up, but when it's wet, it gets a net inflow of water, with water only being able to leave the Salton Sink by evaporation. The other way water can exit is through seepage to go underground to yet lower altitudes. You might think that endorheic regions are rare, but approximately 18% of the Earth's land drains to endorheic lakes or seas, and the largest of these are in the interior of Asia, not surprisingly. But Australia has the highest percentage of endorheic regions at 21%, while North America has only 5%, has the least out of all the continents. As I covered in my first Salton Sea video, the coast is not made of sand, but the salty skeletons of barnacles and fish bones, scales, things like that, all just crushed. And I'm surprised that it's not been crushed to a fine powder, but I suppose not many humans and living things tread here to pulverize it into a fine powder. The Salton Sea has been recreated time and time again due to the mercurial nature of rivers and flooding, and in the last 1,000 years, the Colorado River filled the basin at least 3 times to form a freshwater lake called Lake Cahuilla, named after a Native American tribe here. and eventually the river would always go back to its more eastern course and leave the lake to evaporate. So the Salton Sea was formed in 1905 when massive flooding caused the Colorado River to break through an irrigation canal and flow freely into the Salton Basin for 18 months. Since then, the sea's water levels have been maintained primarily by agricultural flows from the Imperial, Coachella, and Mexicali valleys. The Mexicali Valley through the New River from down south provides water that's considered to be some of the most polluted in the United States. Pollution in the form of agricultural runoff induces algal blooms due to the abundance of nutrients in the inflows that lead into the Salton Sea. And algal blooms can deplete the oxygen levels in the water, killing off fish like this one and many others that are just littering the so-called beaches of the Salton Sea with their corpses. It's pretty gnarly. And I'm sure it didn't originally look like this, but after being bleached in the sun for so long and all the just natural decay, the teeth that just end up looking like that. The real problem, as you can see here, is the high salinity of the Salton Sea. It's 25% saltier than ocean water, and the salinity keeps rising over time. The sea's elevation has also gradually risen over the years. Homes and businesses have been flooded and abandoned, and you can just imagine how powerful the corrosive forces would be from this kind of nasty, grimy, very salty water. The Salton Sea is famous these days for its massive fish and bird die-offs. So the fish die-offs are largely due to two factors of things decomposing. Basically, there's heavy organic sediments carried in by all the inflows and nutrients that get resuspended by the high winds of the Colorado desert, and then they get stirred up to the surface by, turbulence in the water and algae that dies after planktonic blooms. The salinity of the Salton Sea keeps increasing, and at these rates, I once read that it's estimated in a few decades that only tilapia will remain. And tilapia is a fish imported from Africa in 1964, which is not very tolerant of cold temperatures. So sometimes it does get cold during the winter in the desert here, and thus that can cause massive tilapia die-offs as well. And most of the bird and fish die-offs are actually due to microorganisms or their effects, such as deoxygenating. But there's also just regular disease that occurs as well. This plant that we're looking at here is very interesting. It has these little pink flowers and berries that you don't really seem to notice at a distance, but when you get up real close and put them under your nose, they're quite remarkable. And these plants form forests along at least the eastern coast of the Salton Sea. There are just large tracts of beach, I guess, that you can walk by, and we're looking at that now. And there's hardly any people in this region. Most of the people that come here are tourists. I guess there are some locals too that want to do picnics and stuff, but there's a limited window of time during the year at which that can be pleasant. Usually gets really, really hot, or if there's algal bloom and tons of fish or birds die, then it's just going to stink up the entire place. So these plants can grow from shrubs all the way into things resembling trees. And like with many other ecosystems in California, it kind of challenges my conception of what a forest is. I would definitely call this a forest because in places the foliage reaches 6 meters high. But height doesn't really determine what constitutes a forest. In Joshua Tree National Park, I witnessed many places where, there's like cholla forests essentially, and those don't seem to get higher than, say, 3 or 4 meters at the most, and they're very sparse. Also, the Joshua trees themselves were typically pretty far apart due to their very efficient root systems that starve all potential competitors of water within a certain radius of the tree. So this plant is some kind of succulent. It's also very interesting. I think these burned out looking regions are basically dead flowers. I'm not quite sure. All the plants that live on the shore of the Salton Sea no doubt have a very high tolerance for salinity. So I've heard of various solutions for saving the Salton Sea. One of the most far-fetched ones that I read about was basically making a pipeline, maybe 5 meters plus in diameter, that goes all the way to the Pacific Ocean or the Gulf, and basically that would exchange ocean water pumping in one direction into the Salton Sea and having another pipe for outflow. And that's just so ridiculous on so many levels. I mean, the pipes would basically start to form mineral deposits immediately and clog up, and also just the sheer amount of energy wasted by transporting all that water, it would be nonsense. And ultimately, for all these methods that I've read, it's just way too much engineering and work to preserve something that has historically disappeared every few hundred years or so, or every few thousand years. So it's a lot of work to go against nature in that way. I would say the only way the Salton Sea will really get saved definitively is if a massive amount of rain crashes down into the surrounding mountains, or more upstream in the Colorado River, and basically floods this place again, thus reducing the salinity. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that no solutes can leave, only solvent water can leave through evaporation, and thus you're diluting everything back to salinities lower than the ocean, but the volume of the Salton Sea would have to increase by so much that it would flood and destroy everything you see here, all the structures around and roads, and basically everyone would have to rebuild. So there's no real good solution. I mean, there's 4 million tons of salt pouring into this Salton Sea every year, so that's just way too much to deal with, and there's no way of getting it out. In the 1950s, the California Department of Fish and Game stocked a variety of fish species into the Salton Sea in a successful attempt to create a sport fishery. So for decades, the sea was a noted destination for anglers. A study in 1985 revealed that the Salton Sea was more productive in terms of fish caught per angler per hour than any California marine fishery, and equal to the most productive freshwater fisheries in the United States. The Salton Sea is a key stop on the Pacific Flyway for many migratory birds, and because there's been a tremendous loss of wetlands in California along the coast, the Salton Sea has over 380 species of birds that are counting on this more and more, and that's among the highest totals of all national refuges in the country. Oh, by the way, I'm always interested in making species feature videos. So if you know any of the plants in this video and you can identify them along with a time mark at which you see them, I'd be very grateful, and perhaps I could produce some videos. But it's just way too much work to do research on every plant featured here and figure out every single thing. So maybe just this main species that you're seeing here that comprises this beach forest would be fine. I did identify one of those. It was salt heliotrope, that little ground creeping plant with purple and yellow flowers. I had a video on that in the very beginning days of my YouTube channel, and it took forever, like well over a year, for one of my viewers to help crack that puzzle. But as of today, and maybe the last year, I just realized that most people want to watch my plant growing series and seed germination series and whatnot. So these travel videos actually get very few hits relative to all the other genres of videos that I have. I have a very diverse channel, so that's why I can't devote a ton of time to researching every single plant and animal that I encounter on these long hikes. Plus it takes 3 hours to drive to a place like this from my home in San Diego. So there's just a lot more cost and time involved. So that's why I don't have a lot of these videos. But I remember last year in 2013, one of my viewers from Scotland was requesting another visit to the Salton Sea, and I like to explore my immediate Southern California regions, and thus I thought this warranted another trip. And it's just out of personal interest that I went there again and made a much longer video instead of that initial 1 or 2 minute video that I made in my first trip, because after all that driving, I didn't get there until it was pretty late, and there weren't all that many places that stop along the west coast of the Salton Sea either that weren't totally shady. The billboard prior to this one about the impossible fish, the desert pupfish, describes a true champion of survival in the deserts of Southern California. That fish species can survive salinities all the way from freshwater to 7%. And the percentage of salinity is based on grams of salt divided per liter. So currently the Salton Sea is at 4.4, whereas the Pacific Ocean is 3.5. All of this pales in comparison to the Great Salt Lake in Utah, which has a salinity ranging from 5 to 27%. The salinity of the Salton Sea increases by 1% annually, so you can see we're headed on a pretty fast accelerating trajectory to make it unsurvivable for everything besides tilapia and the desert pupfish. On a side note, there's actually geothermal activity around the Salton Sink. There are mud pots, but I don't think they're accessible by regular visitors like me. Basically, you'd have to go trespassing on someone's property to go see them. But I've heard about these things, and all in all, they're just nothing compared to what you can see in Yellowstone National Park anyway, so you might as well just go to Yellowstone National Park if you want to see geysers and things like that. So these are dead branches of the local salt-loving plants that have been just crusted by salt from the salt water and vapors over the years. Everything here, these actually are not all natural rocks. I think some of these are just buildings that collapse into rubble, and basically they have very gross layers of things that kind of look like phlegmy salt on them, but that's actually what stucco looks like, I think, after many years of decay. So what salt water does to neighboring structures, boats and things like that, vehicles, is salt sprays due to the ocean or saltwater lake, water splashing around, and it's carried in mist to neighboring rocks and structures. It deposits on the structures, and because of that, salt is very hygroscopic. It keeps attracting moisture from the air, and it's that moisture that actually corrodes everything. So this is what I'm talking about, the stucco on slabs of what I presume used to be a concrete wall that have just decomposed into this really gross state. Any man-made structures that go unmaintained for several years near bodies of salt water always end up looking like really gross piles of stalagmites. The town I'm in right now is Bombay Beach. It's in Imperial County, California. It's on the coast of the Salton Sea. As you can see, it's the lowest elevation community in America. Its population was only 295 in the 2010 census, down from 366 in 2000. So there's just a lot of abandoned salt-encrusted structures. I did see a lot of occupied buildings a little bit further inland, so to speak, just maybe 50 to 100 meters away from the shore. And the beach town is arranged in a grid. There are plenty of roads to drive around. In some places, especially towards the coast, are more warped or have potholes, but for the large part it's smooth. And I saw some people occupying the buildings. Apparently there's high vacancy rates around here as well. But people do want to live here or rent here sometimes. It's kind of like beachfront property that nobody wants. People come here to film stuff sometimes. The Wikipedia entry says that in 2013, a promotional video for Animal Planet's River Monsters was filmed here. Haven't seen it yet. I like the show. It features a man named Jeremy Wade who goes around trying to catch exotic predators that trigger the imagination, or culprits that sometimes cause human deaths. Although I can't imagine what could be lurking in here because all the fish have been provided for and stocked by mankind. And also, Bombay Beach was used as a reference for the fictional town Sandy Shores in the video game Grand Theft Auto 5. So in addition to those shows or video games, there's this thing called Life After People. It's a documentary series that aired for 2 seasons. It's on Netflix or many of those other online streaming services. And they did a lot of filming around the Salton Sea to model what would happen after people mysteriously disappear. In this case, the saltwater corrosion combined with the sand in the Colorado desert acting as a sandblaster due to the high winds here creates this kind of effect. And they modeled the decay of buildings around salty bodies of water based on structures like these. And the first thing young adults and teenagers probably do is just run around and graffiti everything, but when you get up close you can see the degradation of the cement, the stucco, the roof. Everything is just being sandblasted at a slow rate, and salt just gets on everything, which attracts moisture and causes rot in the wood, which is surprising if you think about how dry this place is and how almost no water ever precipitates here or gets on land. But you can see the metal rods, they're just rusting away, and eventually the structure will collapse into a pile of rubble. It seems like there might be cobwebs there, but I'm not sure if spiders really have much to eat around this place. It's just sort of like a foul beach with not much vegetation around. But it could be that spiders are literally the only things that inhabit this place. I don't see any evidence of snakes or anything like that. So it's just a bunch of garbage and dilapidated buildings slowly corroding over time, and perhaps all the useful stuff like copper piping has long been stolen and sold. Also, just the daily fluctuations, the massive fluctuations in temperature, the UV from the sunlight, and everything else, the high winds just all contribute to degradation of structures that are not maintained regularly. I hope you enjoyed this travel video, and I know the tone's a little depressing, but I have many other videos that are not, so please check out my channel and subscribe. Thank you.